could feel the eyes on the back of my neck. At this point, I wasn't sure if people were actually looking at me or if my paranoia was in overdrive. Either way, it made it impossible for me to focus. Closing my laptop, I willed myself to not look up at the crowded library as I began stuffing my books and papers into my backpack. Midterms were coming up, and my safe space was busier than usual. Putting my laptop in last, I zipped up my backpack and slung it over my shoulder. Yep, not paranoid. The girl at the desk behind mine was completely ignoring her studies to glare at me. I sighed and brushed the hair out of my face. I didn't even know her. Just ignore it. I hurried my way through the library, doing my best not to make eye contact with anyone. I had almost made it when I heard whispers from the front desk. "That's her," a pretty girl working behind the desk whispered. It was done intentionally loud enough for me to hear. With my hand still poised to push the door open, I turned to face the whisperers. The girl at the desk and her friend were both openly staring at me. When they saw I'd stopped to look at them, they didn't shy away. Instead, they smirked, seemingly enjoying my discomfort. "Liar," the girl behind the desk mouthed to me, making her friend chuckle. I stiffened my shoulders and left straight out the door. I had no intention of defending myself to them. Taking a deep breath, I adjusted my heavy backpack on my shoulders and began my trek back to my dorm. The October breeze nipped at my cheeks, making me shiver and zip up my jacket. I reached into my pocket to pull out my headphones, but came up with nothing. I stopped my walk to pat myself down, only to remember that I'd shoved them and my phone into my backpack with my books. Annoyed at myself, I kept trudging on, sticking my hands in my pockets and quickening my pace. As I approached my dorm, I saw a group of people loitering outside the door. I sped up my pace again, hoping to pass through quickly. "Excuse me," I mumbled to a tall, skinny guy who was blocking my path. "Lying slut," was all that came out of his mouth. I didn't even bother looking up to see who he was and shoved my way past him into my building. I could feel my face burning with humiliation, but I did my best to swallow it down. By the time I finally got to my room, I felt like I'd run a mile. I plopped down on my bed and pulled my laptop out of my backpack and opened it up. Logging onto Facebook to message my sister, I noticed I had an invitation to a group called Support Emily. I clicked the link. We as a community should all reach out to support Emily. Lying sluts need friends too. Help support her trip to rehab. Post, "Way to go, Emily. Hope you don't drink yourself to death." Post, "She doesn't need help. She's an attention-seeking whore." Post, "You deserve what you get." Post, "Slut, go to AA. Are ruining people's lives. Do us all a favor and hang yourself." I slammed my computer shut. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to get enough air. My heart pounded as my chest constricted. With shaking hands, I dug through my backpack for my phone. Finding it at the bottom, I grasped it like a lifeline and hit my speed dial. "Hello? Mom?" I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I think I need to come home." "Run? Why run?" My disconnected mind couldn't process what Nick was saying. We needed to get Psycho Mary off of Diana. It didn't matter if there was nothing we could do for her. Standing back and watching was wrong. Then I heard it. Over the slurping sounds coming from Mary, there was a growl coming from the end of the hall. I finally understood the situation we were in. Mary wasn't alone. There were more messed up people coming from the end of the hall, and if we didn't move, we would have to confront them in order to get to the stairs. "Run!" Nick urged again. This time I moved. I sprinted as fast as I could in my heels past Diana and Mary. The door to the staircase was straight ahead and partly open, seemingly broken in its frame. Nick and Paul were hot on my heels, rushing me to go faster. They were almost on us as I turned into the doorway. I caught a glimpse of the messed up people as I fled, and despite their bloody appearances, I realized I recognized some of them from around the office. What the hell happened? I practically flew down the first flight of stairs, almost missing a few steps in my haste. The third-floor door was shut, and faces were at the slit window. I could hear them banging against the door in a frenzy when they saw us. These people have gone insane. Throwing myself down the next flight of stairs, I was spurred on faster by the new threat. The second-floor door was wide open, forcing me to slow down to maneuver around it. Oh my God. As I passed, I could see it was propped open by a body. The person's skull was completely crushed in. I forced myself not to think about it. Unfortunately, I was so focused on not thinking about it that my heel caught a step wrong. My body fell forward, and I went tumbling down the stairs. All I had time to do was throw my hands up to brace for the fall. The initial hit of my chest on the stairs knocked the wind out of my lungs. I felt my palms scraping against the concrete as I tried to slow my face first descent. When my body stopped its tumble, every part of me felt bruised. "Emily, you okay?" Paul yelled from the stairs behind me. Nick got to me first. "You okay? Can you move?" Nick had stopped to try and help me up while Paul ran past us to the first-floor door. "Come on, let's go." Paul hurriedly waved us on. I gave Nick a nod and pushed myself up into a seated position. "Go, just go, I'll catch up." I needed a second to get my aching limbs into a standing position. "What? No. Just come on." Paul was almost bouncing with urgency. Nick just looked me in the eyes. "Go," I urged. I took a deep breath and quickly slipped off my shoes. With 2 hard hits against the stairs, I managed to break one heel off my shoe and quickly repeated the process with the other. My hands were shaking so badly that as I put my shoes back on, I nearly missed my foot altogether. The moment they were on, I pulled myself up. I glanced up and gasped. As it turned out, I wasn't the only one who had fallen down the stairs. One of Mary's companions was crawling down the steps behind me. Nope. I bolted and was able to run even faster in my makeshift flats. I'd never been a good runner. In fact, my high school gym teacher said I had the worst running stance he'd ever seen and had compared me to a T-Rex. That didn't slow me down. Pure fear was coursing through my veins, pushing me on. I got through the first-floor door and slammed it shut behind me. I dashed through the lobby that had once looked welcoming, but now looked like a war zone. It wasn't until I exited the building that I realized how screwed I was. My car keys were in my purse on the 6th floor. There was no way I could go back in, but I didn't see Nick or Paul anywhere. "Emily, over here." My head snapped to the left and I saw the 2 guys standing beside an SUV. Paul was waving his arms around trying to get my attention. I thanked my lucky stars before taking off in their direction. "Get in," Nick ordered. Only once we were all in the car, I felt I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. We made it. Not even thinking of Diana, I was holding back tears. I was beyond thankful to be out of that building. That was until I looked out the window. It was a beautiful September day. The sky was a crisp blue without a cloud in sight. Leaves had begun to change into shades of red and gold, painting the world into the rich colors Massachusetts was known for. The green grass from summer was still showing as few leaves had fallen, and there was a man missing an arm approaching my car window. I gasped. My short-lived relief popped and deflated, leaving dismay in its wake. Whatever was going on wasn't unique to our office building. While it had occurred to me that there was a possibility that what was happening was widespread, it hadn't sunk in until that moment. I really looked around this time, taking it all in. The normally packed parking lot was only half full, and it looked as if some of the cars had been scuffed or sideswiped. There was blood on the window of a car a few spaces away, and smoke was billowing up from the treetops, marring the sky. The man with one arm got closer, his gaze fixed on me as he began scratching and banging on my window. I shrunk away from him. He didn't seem to know how to open doors, but I quickly locked mine just in case. The car backed out of its spot, and I watched the thing's nails slide across my window as we moved out of reach. Nick put the car into drive, and we were off. I could hear Paul sniffling from the passenger seat as he cried into his hand. I wanted to cry too, but my emotions were so jumbled up that I didn't even think I could. Oh God, Diana. She had seemed so nice, and no one deserved to die like that. The more I thought of what happened, the more insane it all seemed to me. Mary didn't just kill Diana, she was eating her. These psychos we'd seen were walking around with missing body parts. It was like something out of a zombie movie. I blanched. I really didn't want to think that was possible, but my mind kept going back to it. Zombie, zombie, zombie. Oh shit. Emphasis on the if. This is a zombie outbreak or something similar. How the hell am I going to defend myself? I had only ever taken one self-defense class in my life. Luckily, I'd taken it last year, but I was pretty sure a kick to the balls wasn't going to slow those things down. I'd never even seen a gun in real life, let alone held one. I was pretty sure that the cops in the small town I grew up in didn't even carry them. Or if they did, I wouldn't have been surprised if they only squirted water. I was screwed. My heart squeezed anxiously in my chest. I had to get to my mom. She would be just 2 towns away, working from home. Since I'd lost my dad in a car accident when I was 6, she had always been there for my sister and me. My sister moved to Utah with her husband shortly after getting married, and hopefully they were safe there. But my mom would be alone. Wait, the car is moving. Where are we going? I asked. I had no concept of how long we had been driving and had no idea where we were. Though honestly, I was bad enough with directions that it might have been my fault. Add that to my list of reasons why I'm screwed. Both Nick and Paul stayed silent, either lost in their own thoughts or choosing to ignore me. We were speeding down back roads, where trees loomed over us, giving the pretense that we were far from downtown. I didn't even want to know what could be happening there. Eventually, we came to a hill that allowed us to see over some of the trees. I immediately spotted where the smoke in town was coming from. There was a trail of scorched earth from what looked like a downed airplane. The crash seemed to have taken out several storefronts and a cell tower. That explains why we didn't get a response from our families. We had been so focused on what was happening in the elevator that we'd likely heard the crash and just assumed the sounds came from inside the office building. I have to get home. Nick, where are we going? I asked again. Nick. My place. It's an apartment building, but it's close by. Nick spoke begrudgingly, obviously focused on the road as he sped around a corner after corner. What? No. I have to get home. My mom is alone. Nick gave an exasperated sigh. Right now, we need to get somewhere safe till we can figure out what the hell is going on. But Paul cut me off. We have families too. That shut me up. Of course they had people they cared about. I realized that my family, my mom, was no more special than anyone else. Except to me. I would have to get my head on straight fast, because it looked as if I would be going at this alone. My mom would need me, and I wasn't going to let her down. If that meant that I would have to leave these guys behind, then so be it. I would find a way to get home. I had to. Nick took another sharp turn, forcing me to catch myself on the seat in front of me. We were now on a main road zipping past office buildings and shops. Occasionally we had to maneuver around an abandoned car. We were able to get about a quarter of a mile before we hit traffic. The cars in front of us were at a dead stop. Lanes that were meant to be going both ways were congested with cars all trying to get out of town. We could hear horns blasting farther up, but it looked like a bunch of the cars near us had been abandoned. There was no way around. "How far away is your place?" Paul asked, turning to Nick. 3 blocks. We were going to have to walk. I did not want to leave the safety of the car. I was anxiously itching at my blood-covered clothing while peering out the window for signs of danger. Nothing. The streets were eerily quiet despite being packed. I had no idea if that was a good sign or not, but it felt wrong. A part of me hoped it meant we had left the worst of the situation behind us. "Any weapons?" Paul asked. "You know, just in case." Nick got out of the car first. "I got a tire iron in my trunk." "That's it?" "Yup." Nick closed his door and moved to the trunk, popping the hood. "You can do this." I took a deep breath and got out of the car. My palms were clammy, and I felt on edge as if I was about to be pounced on at any moment. Paul joined me and gave me a pat on the shoulder in an attempt to comfort me. It didn't work, but I appreciated the gesture. Nick slammed the trunk shut with the tire iron in hand and gave us a steely look. "Let's go." He adjusted his grip to an easy swing hold and strode past us. We quickly followed suit. I didn't like feeling vulnerable at all. I desperately wanted some kind of weapon. That's when an idea popped into my head. "Hey Nick, give me your keys." "My keys? Why?" He hesitated, giving me a calculating look. "Please?" Evidently, he decided that giving me his keys wouldn't put him at risk because he tossed them to me. I barely managed to snatch them out of the air. "Thanks." "Don't lose them," he said. "My apartment key is on there." There were 3 keys on the keychain, and they were all attached to a metal ring on the end of a strip of leather. I wove the keys through the knuckles of my right hand and grasped the leather strip in my palm. I knew it wasn't the best weapon, but it was better than nothing. "I won't," I said, looking Nick in the eye. He surprised me by smirking at me. "Smart." I hoped so. Though if we were lucky, I wouldn't have to test it. As we walked, the sounds of car horns got louder, but it was a block before we came upon people. At first, it was just people in their cars. I walked past a family of 4 inside a minivan. The parents seemed to be arguing and gesturing wildly, while the children cried in the back seat. When the father noticed us weaving around the cars, his gaze changed from angry to crazed with fear. The honking from that car got louder. It was only after we passed that I realized he had that reaction from seeing me. My blood-covered body. I tried to make myself more inconspicuous after that by walking closer to the towering frames of Paul and Nick. People still took note of us, some choosing to abandon their cars and begin walking as well. By the second block, there were more people already on the streets. There was a mother sitting on the sidewalk rocking a blood-soaked little girl in her arms. She was crying and calling for help, stroking the girl's hair. I had to force myself to look away. There was a priest outside his church, ushering people in, blessing them as they passed the threshold. His expression was one of resignation. Even when a woman fell to her knees begging him for guidance, all he could do was bless her and help her enter. The car right next to me honked, making me jump. Nick no longer held the tire iron in a fighting stance. Instead, he had tucked it into his side in an attempt to blend in. I gave the keys a squeeze for reassurance. We had made it to the 3rd block and my racing heart was pounding in my ears. "We're almost there," Nick muttered under his breath. Following his words was the crack of a gunshot. The 3 of us ducked a bit in surprise. I couldn't pinpoint where it had come from, but I could hear someone screaming and crying from a good distance behind us. Without warning, Paul grabbed my wrist and started tugging me forward. We sped up our pace to a jog. "Keys now," Nick ordered. I relinquished the keys from my hand as we approached a 3-story brick building. Tossing them to Nick in a clumsy fashion, we did our best to speed up our pace. He got to the door first and began to work the lock as Paul and I stood at the base of the stoop. There was a woman kneeling next to a bench about 10 feet away from us. I could see feet dangling off the edge, but the back of the bench obstructed my view of the occupant. "Darren? Honey?" I could hear the woman sobbing. She kept shaking him as though she was trying to wake him up. "Oh God, no. No, baby, please." My heart skipped a beat. I really wanted those keys back. It seemed as if Nick was struggling. He kept cursing under his breath and pushing at the door with his shoulder while jiggling the handle. "Darren?" My head whipped around back to the bench where I noticed the occupant's foot move. Zombie. A shiver ran up my spine and I tried to shake it off. A growl came next. From the corner of my eye, I could see that Nick's movements had become more frantic. Paul grabbed the tire iron from where Nick had placed it against the door frame. The woman screamed and stumbled back away from the bench as the occupant lunged for her. They fell to the ground as the man bit into her forearm. "Nick, hurry!" Paul yelled as he brought the tire iron up, holding it like a baseball bat. The thing's head snapped in our direction and began working itself into a standing position, leaving the woman clutching her arm and sniveling on the pavement. It moved towards us in the same strange, stiff shuffle Mary had. I was closer to it, but it went right past me for Paul. He attempted a swing, but the thing used its body weight to knock him back against the side of the building, making him drop the tire iron. The sound of the metal hitting the pavement prompted me into action. Paul pushed the thing back by its shoulders as it snapped its teeth at him. I did the first thing I could think of and grabbed the thing by its short, curly hair. I sunk my fingers in until I was scratching at the scalp and began to pull with all my might. I held the head back in my best attempt to keep its teeth away from Paul, but kept having to adjust my grip as I ripped out tufts of hair. Nick quickly lunged in and grabbed the thing by the back of the shirt collar. The 3 of us together managed to get the thing to lose its balance and it fell backwards to the ground. I managed to jump away from it just in time. Before it could take me down with it, it began to get back up, but Nick scooped up the tire iron and with no hesitation, he lodged it into the thing's chest. It didn't even flinch. I should have expected it, but the thing's lack of awareness to pain was jarring. It just continued to flail in its attempts to get at us as Nick held it skewered to the ground. "What the fuck?" Paul gasped. Nick yanked the tire iron back with a hard tug, freeing it from the zombie's chest cavity. Then, he shoved the iron down straight through the head. It stopped moving. Nick struggled to get the tire iron out of the skull. Pulling hard, it tore free, causing him to stagger back. "Get inside," he huffed, trying to catch his breath. I became conscious of the fact that I was still holding on to clumps of hair that I'd ripped out and quickly released it. Hurriedly moving to the door, I wiped my hands off on each other. I placed a hand on the doorknob and was ready to turn it when a voice came from behind us. "Can I come with you?" An awkward silence fell over the room. None of us seemed to know what to do next. "Anyone hungry?" Paul suggested with a half-hearted smile. As it turned out, Nick had a satellite radio. He'd gone for it after giving Paul the okay to cook. I'd recommended using the perishables and was delighted to find a frozen pizza. But Paul thought we needed something healthier. He got busy grilling 2 steaks and making a salad for us to share. It seemed like a lot of food, But we didn't know how long the power would last, and I was feeling the effects of not having anything but coffee all day. Nick had closed the blinds on the windows and set up the radio on the counter. It had played nothing but an emergency broadcast for the last hour and a half. It told us to stay indoors and await further instructions. A potential viral outbreak had occurred, and we were to contain anyone who might be infected. They recommended not approaching anyone sick and to call emergency services. After the elevator, I knew no one would come. I kept glancing at the woman from my perch on the counter stool. Charlene was bandaged and tied to the furnace next to the desk with a sheet. It turned out that she was quite the talker and had been debating with Paul about what it was exactly that was happening outside while he cooked. "There is no way your husband was still alive," Paul said as he tossed the salad. "He got up and moved, didn't he?" Charlene countered. Nick and I had sat silently for the most part, letting them work it out. However, when Paul had brought up zombies, I had agreed. Nothing else my mind had come up with could explain what we'd seen. "Yeah, and that's the point. You said he died on that bench." He leaned over and opened the fridge to get the salad dressing out. "I think it has to do with that article, the one about that case of the weird flu in New York. That story also mentioned outbursts of violence. We've seen plenty of violence, but when Nick stabbed the your husband, he tried to get back up. I mean, it might have to do with that disease, or they could be lying. It could be some kind of bio-warfare gone wrong." I was starting to zone out of Paul's ramble. "Wait, what disease?" "What disease?" I voiced my question, cutting Paul off. I had no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't heard anything about sick people prior to the emergency broadcast. "It's been all over the news the last few days. You haven't been watching the news?" No, I hadn't. In fact, I had made it my mission to avoid the news over the last few weeks, at least until my story blew over. Nick, would it be all right if I took a shower?" I asked, deciding to avoid the question. As much as I wanted to snarf down the food as soon as it got out of the oven, I also needed to get out of my blood-caked clothing, and this seemed like the perfect time. "Sure," he said, looking up from his radio. "You can get some clean clothes from my dresser, and there's a clean towel on the rack in the bathroom." "Thanks." I excused myself and could hear Charlene and Paul get back into their debate as I entered the bedroom. It was simple, with a bed, dresser, and nightstand with a lamp. The walls were stark white without any decorations. I opened the top drawer first and picked out a thick, long-sleeved, plain gray shirt. Searching for pants took a while, but eventually, I settled on a pair of black sweatpants. Both looked like they would be huge on me. I slipped out of the bedroom and into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. Doing my best to avoid looking at myself in the mirror, I closed the toilet seat lid to place my clean clothing on top. I winced as I removed my makeshift flats from my feet, revealing torn open blisters on my heels and along the sides. I'd done more damage than I'd thought. I added socks to my mental checklist of things I needed. My plan was to leave in the morning. I was going to have to ask Nick for a few starter supplies and a bag tonight after dinner. Hopefully he'd agree, because I really didn't want to steal from him. But I would, if I had to. I just needed enough to get me going in case I couldn't get into a store nearby. Sighing, I pulled my shirt over my head. I glanced down and saw my stomach was tinted red from blood. I hastily stripped off the rest of my clothing and got myself under the stream of scalding hot water. I spent a long time scrubbing until my skin turned pink in agitation. I had a large bruise forming on my stomach and smaller ones on my forearms and knees from falling down the stairs. My hair took the longest to clean out, as the bloody tips seemed to have congealed and knotted together. I stepped out feeling refreshed, but cringed, putting back on my damp bra and underwear that I had done my best to wash in the shower. I put on the shirt and pants, tying the drawstrings tight. Digging through the medicine cabinet and drawers till I found Nick's comb, I brushed out my hair and braided it so it would stay out of my face. I tied it off with a rubber band I found in the mostly empty wastebasket. Exiting the bathroom with my shoes in hand, I entered the main room where it seemed everyone had begun eating. Paul and Nick sat at the counter stools, while Charlene munched away from her place on the floor. I gave the guys a small smile as I entered the kitchenette to get myself a serving. "Feel better?" Paul asked, swallowing a mouthful of food. "Abso." "Shit," Charlene interrupted. "Can you get me a napkin? I got a nosebleed."